So we'll start letting people in, and warm welcome to everyone, and we'll start in a minute. Okay, Marietta, if we could switch back to welcoming mode. So good afternoon, everyone in Europe, and good morning to those of you that join us from the US. Warm welcome on behalf of the Center for the Study of Democracy, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion on the possible scenarios for Bulgaria to do full decarbonization by 2050. And the transition that will take us there. We're going to hear from a great panel today. We have with us also the Deputy Prime Minister of Bulgaria, who will hear the views both from Europe, from our partners in Europe, from the European Commission, from the Joint Research Center, and also from the US. Thank you really for joining us. As you know, CSD's mission is building bridges. So we very much look forward to this week's visit of President Biden, and we hope that the green transition is going to take a big part of that. We also would like to thank our partners from the European Climate Foundation for Climact, with whom we've worked to deliver today what you will hear from my colleagues Radostina Primova and Martin Vladimirov on the three scenarios that we propose and that we've built and that we'll present also to the Bulgarian authorities and to our European partners. And we look forward really to ideas and to working together, realizing these ideas in Bulgaria. We have a new ambitious government, and I'm happy now to turn over the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of the European funds and the Recovery and Resilience Plans of Bulgaria, Mr. Taras Pekanov. Before that, just to note that this meeting is recorded and it will be a live stream, so I guess a lot of people will be watching there too. And we look forward also to a discussion afterwards. So please, while people talk, post your questions in the Q&A box down in your screen or in the chat. My colleagues will post there the rules of engagement. I look forward to the discussion. It's going to be a great meeting, I'm sure. We aim to have it within 1 hour. Minister Pekanov, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Stefanov. Dear all, thank you very much for the invitation for today's event. I'm very happy to participate in this event and in this panel. And I would like to thank the Center for the Study of Democracy for organizing it, but also more broadly and more generally for gathering and disseminating knowledge through the years in the Bulgarian society and contributing to many different discussions and topics that are high on the agenda in terms of economic, social policy, and other important societal questions. Starting from the pandemic and the pandemic-related overall political and economic uncertainty, this has put our economies at a crossroads, especially the European economy, the world economy at a crossroads. It is, however, also a historical chance to use this situation to improve our long-term resilience, the potential of our economies, while also addressing other problems that may have been ignored through the years or may have not been addressed enough. And as we know, I would actually start, it is a difficult time for all economies, but as we know, the key pillar for me of the European Union is the European monetary union. Why am I starting there? Because the common currency and all the rest of the European economic architecture, it has been developing for many years, has been evolving. As you know, there is a well-known saying that the euro, the common currency, is like a bumblebee. According to science, it should not fly, but it does fly, and it does evolve, and it does survive different crossroads. And last year we were at such a crossroad. Last year we were at a point where we had to decide: do we want to go further together, or do we want to let each country solve its problems alone? And I myself have been on the opinion for many years that we have to go this road together, that the European institutions are stronger and the European member states are stronger when they are together. And this has contributed to this important step last year, that finally the European Monetary Union architecture, and now also partly a fiscal architecture, has been developing to try to address the crisis together. So this, I think, will help us in the long run very, very, very much. And it also fulfills a lot of previous discussions that we have had on a closer, ever closer union. And these discussions, we have had them in economic circles for years, and we can start from Robert Mundell, the father of the euro, but also one of the forerunners of the idea why we need to solve our economic problems, but now we'll move also to broader societal problems together, going through many works also by Kenneth Rogoff, and on the need, how a monetary union can solve crisis together by having some form of a fiscal risk sharing, by having some form of fiscal stabilization function, which is also part of the works of the late Emmanuel Fari, one professor at Harvard, who has made very important contributions to why fiscal risk sharing is important. In this respect, the Recovery and Resilience Facility has been born out of these discussions to go out of a crisis better, more stronger, but also faster. The Recovery and Resilience Facility and the Recovery and Resilience plans will be the cornerstone of our future economic recovery. And I think they are the important resources to jumpstart, to boost, to provide a financial boost for the economy for the coming years, but also to help redesign and future-proof it. Because it was always a question, not only can we do this together, but also what are we going to spend any additional budget that we might have or we might decide to share. And in this essence, it was the right time to put to pinpoint the climate, the green transition and the digital transition as top priorities for the European Union. And it is rightly a central pillar of the Recovery and Resilience Plan. For Bulgaria, but for all countries will contribute to the greening of the economy in the coming years. For Bulgaria, this will be extremely important. Why? Because we are a member state that is very reliant on polluting energy sources, unfortunately, where significant decarbonization efforts are still needed. Although we are among the countries with the best results in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we are still, we have over 40% share of coal in the energy mix, something that we have to address. We need 3.5 times more energy currently and 6.8 times more raw material than the average EU country for the production of 1 unit of GDP. So we can see why this is a major challenge for the economy going forward. And this is why it has to be so central also in the recovery and resilience plans, let alone the fact that we have the commitments inside of the EU regulation that pinpoint this, and we have to fulfill them to comply with the 37% for greening the economy and 20% for digitalizing the economy further. The Recovery and Resilience Facility was difficult to negotiate. It came at the right point in time, but previous efforts have failed to have such a tool. So we have a historic regulation and a historic achievement with this, but we now need to build up on it, to step up to the task. And we have heard comments from civil society, as well as from some of the services of the European Commission, that we have not yet complied enough with an ambitious goal for our own recovery and resilience plan. And me in my position now in the caretaker government under Prime Minister Stefan Yanev, we are working very high and very high speed and very intensively on addressing these issues. This includes not only the RRF regulation, it includes also the synergies with other programs that are ongoing or will be ongoing under the umbrella of the multi-annual financial framework for the coming years. We need to ensure that the synergies are there, that the demarcation is successful, and also contributing to other initiatives in this area. The energy sector is without a doubt one of the most challenging areas in need of reform in Bulgaria. And it is clear we need to think out of the box to find measures to substitute the business as usual thinking. We know that at some point there would be a need for phasing out of lignite. There will be a need to keep our reliance on natural gas to a minimum, and to ensure also something that is very important for me, that the transition, however, is just and fair, that the society actually can also acknowledge, can relate to it. The citizens can relate to it. Of course, the main challenge is also to find ways to effectively balance supply and demand in the energy sector while ensuring grid reliability. So we are currently considering a number of projects, and we're weighting their pros and cons. And our goal is to include innovative projects, also some pilot projects when possible in our recovery and resilience plan. That would also have the effect, even if they are pilot projects, that they will ensure exactly that there is what we call crowding in. So there is a pilot project where the European funds are providing the financing and the state is providing the lead in the hope of unlocking the long-term potential of these sources, in the hope of crowding in further investments in the years to come by showing that this is a reliable and sustainable strategy to follow. And to realize such ideas, of course, we have to think how they should be economically viable. So we should ensure that they are made by using the market mechanisms that are sustainable also from an economic point of view in the long run. And of course, we also need to improve on energy efficiency. So previous drafts of our plan has put a huge share of our recovery and resilience plan on energy efficiency. And we are also seeking ways to improve this for both residential and commercial buildings, also in the transport sector, especially for railways and city transportation, to be sure that we are making the best efforts in this area. And as I mentioned, not the least, we need to ensure that this transition is just and fair. When we are designing our measures, we are trying also to balance, to address and incorporate the social elements, the equity of the measures by comparing the socio-economic risks and local impacts on the communities and job stability. I think it is important to acknowledge that the transition would not be sustainable in societal terms if it is not acknowledged by the whole society. If it generates risks, or even if it generates fears across the population, and if they don't feel it is in their best interest to be in favor of the green transition. So these are important things that we hope that the Just Transition Fund will partly address. Of course, the developments of last year are partly unfortunate, since the Just Transition Fund is not as big as I think we would have liked to be, to scale down, which I think was not the best thing. And this raises the question whether resources provided will be enough, and also whether they will reach all the regions that we feel should be deemed as transition regions. This is an important part that my team and myself are considering in evaluating different measures and different changes. So in conclusion, I think the long-term prospects of the Bulgarian economy, as well as all the other economies of the European Union member states, can only be improved and guaranteed if we, on one hand, increase our ambitions, address properly the requirements, the needs to fulfill the green transition, to ensure investments in these areas, but also relating this to to the socio-economic realities, especially in our country. We are still the poorest country. We still have the lowest GDP, something that we really want to improve on. And we need the improvements to reach the citizens. This is why they need to feel how the recovery and resilience plans are actually improving their lives in the coming years. So only when citizens are experiencing this in a just way, this transition, I think they will recognize that it is in their best interest and that they are in favor of it. So I thank you very much for organizing this discussion. I will be very interested in what the experts have to say on these matters. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Pekanov. And we already have questions for you, but I suggest we wait for the discussion and get more questions. I now turn it to my colleague, Martin Vladimirov, who is CSD's Director of Climate and Energy. Martin, the floor is yours, and I look forward to this really fantastic panel and to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruslan, and thank you, Mr. Pekanov, for the insightful notes on how the recovery challenges should be seen as a cornerstone of the EU process of convergence, and in general, stronger economic integration, an opportunity to switch the Union to a higher economic growth gear, and also closer in bridging the transatlantic policy gap on issues such as energy transition, just and fair transition. All of these issues will be discussed by our speakers today in more details. And now it is time to open the panel. I would like to ask them to keep their presentations brief, within 5 to 7 minutes, as to give enough time for discussion at the end. And I'll make a quick note if you're going a bit over time. As a reminder to the attendees, you can ask your questions in our Q&A panel, and you can address them also by raising your hand in the Zoom option function next to your name. So now I'm happy to turn to my colleague, Radostina Primova, who has been spearheading CSD's efforts to translate the decarbonization modeling scenarios that we have been working with Klimaton. And she will present our most recent policy action document that will draw out 3 different decarbonization pathways for Bulgaria in its objective to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. Radostina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Many thanks, Martin. And I would like, first of all, to welcome virtually all the participants that are joining us for this interesting panel across the globe. It's great that we have a European-wide participation and also participants joining us from the US. So I look forward to a very insightful and productive discussion. And hopefully we can exchange great lessons that could help us to improve our policies in Bulgaria, but also worldwide. Well, first of all, I'm going to share my screen. And I hope you're already seeing also my presentation. I hope you see already my presentation. So good afternoon, of course, everyone. And the Paris Agreement has been a game changer in the history of international climate negotiations. We're currently seeing how the number of countries which are announcing pledges to achieve net zero emission is already growing. And the European Union has already adopted a carbon neutrality goal by 2050. However, the success of reaching these net zero emissions will also depend on the implementation at national level and on the targets, measures, and long-term planning of each of the member states. Last week, the International Energy Agency came up with a report, basically in May, that even if we take together all the pledges combined, which are scaling up their ambitions, we still fall very short of reaching the 1.5 degree. And basically, we need to review and scale up ambition every 5 years. So for this, we need a kind of a long-term planning, and we need to design in a very smart way the trajectories and also the milestones, how we are going to reach this kind of net zero emissions. Today, I'm going to focus a bit on our work for the Bulgarian context that we have carried out. And I'm going to present 3 of the more ambitious scenarios, how the green recovery could help us also with reaching this kind of more long-term decarbonization 2050 target. So our scenarios are already based on interactive modeling instruments, which instrument called EU Calculator. It looks at already decarbonization trajectories of the energy supply sector, buildings, transportation, industry, and LULUCF, which includes agriculture and land use change. This model constructs an economic model, basically, which is based on a bottom-up approach of projecting consumption patterns that basically shape afterwards the trajectories. And based on these trajectories, we suggest particular sectoral policy targets on what needs to change in Bulgaria's funding priorities, what needs to change into the regulatory framework. So the models are, which I'm going to present to you. The first model is based on decarbonization, based on behavioral changes, where the focus lies very much on collective and individual lifestyle changes, on our consumption pattern, the way we utilize the living space, but also our mode of transport, our diet, and so our everyday practices, which lead to reducing emissions. The second model is a bit different. It's basically the major focus there is the penetration and mass scale penetration into cut-edging technologies in the different sectors, industry, energy, but also the transport sector. And the final scenario, the green plus scenario, it is a third way pathway towards carbon neutral economy. It includes both behavioral changes and technology driven. So there we have a combination of both utility scale projects and citizen driven renewable energy communities and already prosumer oriented projects. Coming to the building sector, we already see that according to most scenarios, greenhouse gas emissions need to shrink by 99% by 2050. And we're already moving, we need to already move towards the so-called near zero buildings. The main driver there basically is the phase out of firewood, natural gas, liquid fuels, and also the massive electrification and market uptake of e-fuels. While in the technological scenario, we have a faster speed up of the implementation of technologies such as heat pumps, PV installations, solar thermal technologies, and also the use of district heating. In the behavioral scenario, the focus is on changes in consumption patterns and also more efficient use of the building stock and innovative materials in building. Coming to the power supply trajectories, there we came to the conclusion that the fastest way to reach decarbonization is to electrify power supply. And also in those scenario, Bulgaria has to reach 100% renewable energies by 2050. However, the differences in the speed and the scope of new renewable energies and also storage technologies and also the difference in capacity expansion. Of course, unsurprisingly, the steepest growth occurs in the technological scenario where renewable energy capacity reaches 49 terawatt hours in 2050, driven not only by the widespread onshore wind, PV solar generation, hydroelectric, but also much more, an expansion of the offshore wind and geothermal energy. Only in the technological scenario, Bulgaria is also remains an net exporter of electricity and exports 12% of its electricity. Nuclear, we already found out, as you can see by the trajectories, that in those scenarios, nuclear in the long term will not be part of the cost-effective climate solution, as this is currently the most expensive power generation technology. And you will see that after 2040, nuclear power output declines significantly. Already the challenge in the industry sector is already lowering the energy demand and fostering new innovations, implementations of costly technology. This will be very challenging for a country like Bulgaria. Here, the main drivers are the fuel mix and also the efficiency of the material. And the major difference between the scenarios is that already is the type of fuels used in production. In the technological scenario, the fossil fuels will be 100% replaced by synthetic fuels in steel, aluminum, cement, glass, and ammonia. And this shift, for example, is limited to 25% already in the behavioral scenario. So the other technological innovation is we need to combine renewable energy and green hydrogen, and we also need a combination between renewable energy and carbon capture and utilization and storage. Coming to the sustainable mobility trajectories, here the major driving force will be changes in the passenger demand, as you can see. And in the Green Plus and the technological scenario, they foresee a 33% decline in passenger demand by 2050. And in the behavioral scenario, the percentage is even 43. Quite challenging would be also reducing the energy consumption here, that needs to reduce between 70 and 80% in the behavioral scenario. The other thing that we observed is that what will occur is also a profound shift in the evolution of the share of electric vehicles in the car fleet. And the number, for example, of zero emission vehicles in two of the scenarios will be around 70%, and of course 100% in the technological scenario. So how this kind of trajectories could be translated already in the current strategic documents and finding priorities in Bulgaria? First of all, starting from the building sector, we need a much more comprehensive sustainability approach to deep renovation and near zero buildings. Energy efficiency alone will not be a sufficient and shallow renovation, which is currently the case in the National Recovery Plan. The current version will not be sufficient to attract enough private investments, because we need to take into consideration a much broader scope of sustainability criteria, such as also the quality of the building materials, their contribution to healthy living standard, and capacity also to reduce emissions. Renovation rates need to increase to 3 to 4% also in order to reach these kind of targets. There needs to be a better complementarity between the measures in the National Recovery Plan and the ones in the Regional Development Program that needs to be tailored to smaller municipalities. We already see that we need to design much more innovative financial instruments for energy efficiency and enabling consumers, and especially the vulnerable consumers, to co-own renewable energies and to integrate this into an energy poverty strategy. So energy poverty measures should target in particularly most vulnerable consumers and avoid market distortion. When we already come to the power supply, we already see a huge focus there on large infrastructural projects. So the investment priorities need to shift away from the large infrastructural projects already to decentralizations, to more decentralized energy projects, modernization and expansion of the grids and storage facilities. And as I already mentioned earlier, this would require also an immediate phase out of the lignite-fired power plants. We need to be basically to avoid this strong focus into gasifications of the coal regions with the current natural gas pipeline, which are currently foreseen as part of the National Recovery Plan. And that could also lead to a long-term lock-in to fossil fuels for Bulgaria, and need to foresee a swifter transition. And some of the possible sustainable, basically we also need to reach supply diversifications. Some sustainable alternatives that we already suggest there is to utilize the solar potential in the Maritsa East region, and to plan so-called decentralized renewable energy-based concentrated solar power facilities with thermal storage, and also concentrated PV plants with electrochemical storage. The other very important thing is we need to unlock the Black Sea offshore wind potential, as we have seen in some of the scenarios. And already we can also produce hydrogen from wind energy, but for this we already need to enhance our research capabilities. We need an additional sub-program for hydrogen research, including funding of fuel cell applications, and last but not least, much more targeted measures to support prosumers, energy communities, and vulnerable consumers. For this also, the regulatory framework needs to change in order to enable these type of actors, of citizens of renewable energy communities, to participate on equal terms also on the market. And we also need access to much more tailored financial mechanisms by which they could, like microcredits and micro grants, through which they can take part in the energy transition.
One minute, please.
Okay. We already see, well, in terms of industrial, electrification is a key word for all sectors. In the industry sector, we need to decarbonize heat and reduce energy intensity. We also need to integrate better green hydrogen and fossil fuels, as I mentioned before. And the other thing, very important point, is the competition for access to rare earth metals is going to increase globally. And many of these metals are at high supply risk. We need a regional market for raw materials, for recycled raw materials. So Bulgaria, a great possibility for Bulgaria is to kickstart a sub-program on recycling raw materials in service of industrial decarbonization. We also need to attract private and institutional investors to support these green startups, and this could happen through the decarbonization fund. For the sustainable mobility, we need a whole e-mobility plan and also massive investments in low carbon infrastructure investments, but also disincentives for the use of internal combustion engine. We are seeing that happening in other countries, and possibly to introduce a carbon price also on fossil fuel there, so that we can already incentivize these developments to happen. Not so much time for sustainable agriculture, but just two very key words is that our agricultural practices needs to be aligned already with the standards of the Food Agency of the UN. And we need to support not the big agro-industrial players, but we need to support sustainable small-scale family farmers that are practically the ones that are fostering the innovation to happen. And as we're seeing in all the scenarios a growth of negative emissions in land use until 2050. And this is something lacking in the recovery plan and also in other areas. We need a stronger focus on tree planting, afforestation measures, greening public space, and last but not least, very coherent forest protection measures. Just one word I wanted to say is, of course, these are kind of ideal type of scenarios, and they will very much depend on macroeconomic development, on the pace also of technology transfer. And in particularly, this kind of transatlantic cooperation could foster a better market within the EU for green innovations, technology transfer, and share of best practices between US states and also European countries as well. Thank you very much. And last but not least, we need a European level. We need a European level. We cannot manage this alone, each country for itself. That's why it's great that we have an internal energy market, and we need to foster interconnections between countries.
Thank you very much, Agustina. This was a very comprehensive overview of our main policy findings. And really, these decarbonization pathways are quite ambitious, but they provide us with kind of North Star, a long-term objective to design adequate measures right now that can basically jumpstart.
Martin, we lost you. But
yeah, he's frozen.
Yes, you're frozen. So I will take over just to do the transition to our panel. Yes, please go on.
Sorry, I didn't know that my connection dropped. Ms. Gavalugova is a policy officer at DG Climate Action at the European Commission, and she's also responsible for assessing the decarbonization agenda of the national recovery plans. And will provide some insight on what are the main green transition objectives of the Commission in terms of the recovery instruments. Nevena, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this conference. I hope everyone can hear me well. Just a clarification. I am not responsible for the assessment of the Bulgarian RRP. I work in the policy development unit of the European emissions trading system, so it's a very specific field. I am going to present a brief overview of the Commission policies when it comes to recovery and resilience. I will try to be as brief as possible, just to give you an overview of the political context first. As was already mentioned by your colleagues and by Minister Pekanov, in 2019, the European Commission presented the European Green Deal as Europe's new growth strategy. It sets an ambitious long-term objective of no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050 for the EU. Following up, in 2020, the Commission proposed the European climate law, which would operationalize this political commitment into a legal obligation. And in April 2021, there was a political agreement reached between the European Parliament and the Council on this climate law, which would then secure the delivery of this commitment. Looking to the current decade, to 2030, the climate law increased the EU's emission reduction goal from 40% compared to 1990 levels to at least 55% of net EU emission reductions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. In view of achieving these more ambitious objectives, on the 14th of July this year, the Commission will present a comprehensive package of legislative proposals, the so-called Fit for 55 package, which would detail proposed revisions of comprehensive set of climate legislation, which includes the European emissions trading system, the effort sharing regulation, and other policies. At the same time, as you all know, over the past year and a half, the EU has worked to achieve these climate change goals in parallel with addressing the COVID crisis, and has been going through the biggest recession in EU history. So to tackle these double objectives, the EU reached, as Minister Pekanov called it, a historic agreement on the Next Generation EU initiative, which empowers the European Commission to raise 750 billion euro on the financial markets to support member states in their efforts towards green recovery. At the heart of this package is the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is a new tool providing member states with financial support to step up public investments and reforms in the aftermath of the COVID crisis. The facility has a resource of 672.5 billion euro, and its purpose is to help member states address the economic and social impact of the pandemic whilst ensuring that their economies undertake green and digital transitions and become more sustainable and resilient. The funding of the facility will be available to member states based on the implementation of national recovery and resilience plans. That is, in order to receive support, member states must prepare such plans, setting out a coherent package of reforms and public investment projects to be implemented by the year of 2026. National plans are expected to address the challenges identified in the European semester process and take into account the targeted recommendations that the Commission has addressed to the specific member state. And they should also include measures to address the challenges and reap the benefits of the green and digital transitions. That is why the Commission has encouraged member states to focus their investments in the plans in the so-called 7 EU flagships areas. Those are areas we believe member states should target in their plans. They range from clean technologies, renewables and green infrastructure to energy efficient buildings and sustainable transport. From 5G technology and artificial intelligence to public and private sector digitization. Programs for continuous learning, training, and reskilling will be equally important. At the same time, the Commission has a duty to ensure that the national plans are aligned with common EU priorities, and therefore it will assess the national plans against the following 2 key targets. Each plan has to include a minimum of 37% of expenditure related to climate and a minimum of 20% of expenditure to foster the digital transition. So all in all, more than 50% of the funds will have to be used for investments that further the EU's green and digital objectives. In addition, the plans have to comply with the principle of do not significant harm. So investments that are not allowed are, for instance, investments in fossil fuels and related infrastructure, investments in new roads or in waste incineration. The Recovery and Resilience Facility provides thus a unique opportunity to push forward modernization in member states and in the current context in Bulgaria, shifting it towards a greener and low carbon energy system, including by setting a clear path for a coal phase out. Again, as was mentioned by speakers before me, ensuring a just and socially balanced transition is integral to this ambitious climate agenda. While all member states are concerned by the EU's climate and energy targets, not all member states, regions, and cities start the transition from the same point or have the same capacity to respond. And that is why the Just Transition mechanism was set up as part of the European Green Deal to deliver on the ambition to leave no region behind. It includes the Just Transition Fund, which is a dedicated Just Transition scheme under cohesion policy. Its resource is 17.5 billion euro. It also includes the Just Transition Investment Scheme, the so-called Invest EU, which would trigger up to 15 billion euro private investment, and a public sector loan facility backed by the EU budget, which would leverage up to 30 billion euro public investments through preferential lending conditions. So altogether, the mechanism is expected to mobilize around 70 billion euro of targeted support in vulnerable regions. Bulgaria will be one of the main beneficiaries of the fund, having one of the largest Just Transition Fund allocations in the EU, namely 1.2 billion euro. This is a unique funding opportunity to finance the necessary investments to cope with the impact of the transition towards a climate neutral economy. The Just Transition mechanism includes a strong governance framework centered on territorial just transition plans. So support from the fund is going to be conditional on the approval of these plans. Each plan should contain a description of the transition process at national level, including a timeline for key transition steps towards the 2030 climate targets and towards the 2050 climate neutrality objectives. Moreover, these steps should be consistent.
Can I ask you for 1 minute more, please?
Of course, yeah. Of course. It should be consistent with the national energy and climate plans, and we'll need to demonstrate clear evidence of a transition process and its impact at the level of the concerned territory. So Bulgaria is currently benefiting from technical support for the preparation of its territorial just transition plans for the regions of Stara Zagora, Kyustendil, and Pernik. The support aims to help set out the social, economic, and environmental challenges and give details on needs for economic diversification. There are, besides the Just Transition mechanism, since I come from the emissions trading system unit, maybe just to mention that there are other sources of funding available, such as the Modernization Fund under the EU ETS, which under which Bulgaria will receive close to 800 million euro, depending on the carbon price, to support energy efficiency and modernization of its energy system. There is also the Innovation Fund, which would provide up to 10 billion euro over 2020 to 2030 for the commercial demonstration of low carbon technologies. So in a nutshell, funding and support for designing an ambitious transition path for the most affected territories in Bulgaria are available. And the cost of not using this momentum could therefore translate into, as was mentioned by co-participants, jeopardizing the ambition of not leaving any person and any region behind. Thank you very much. I hope it was not too long.
Thank you, Mrs. Gavrilova. This was very comprehensive on the European Commission's goals and financial instruments at disposal to boost the long-term low-carbon transition in Europe. And we appreciate DG Klima and DG Energy's help in guiding member states in designing a very ambitious national recovery plan. Now I would like to turn the floor to Timon Venner, who is the head of the Berlin office and senior researcher at the Wuppertal Institute. Dr. Venner has headed the very important work of the Institute on the Green Recovery Tracker. That is an interactive tool for comparing national recovery plans across Europe, focusing on the ambition level of their decarbonization agenda. In this respect, I would like to ask him to focus on some shining examples from across Europe that can serve as models for the final development also of the Bulgarian national plan. Thank you. The floor is yours, Timon.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, colleagues, for inviting me. And I find this already an exciting discussion. And let me just say first, Minister Pekanov, your introductory remarks, that sounds like a lot of energy and new thoughts in the room. And interesting discussion to have it virtually. Thank you for letting me participate. I would love to be on site and get a feel of what this feels like, the process. As Martin has said, we are assessing the recovery actions in many member states, and we have published our results on the website greenrecoverytracker.org. You can find it. It is an interactive website. And maybe just to, I don't want to bore you with the methodology too much, but maybe just some key frameworks. We really look at the long-term economic recovery measures, not very much at the short-term financial support. The guiding question for us is really climate mitigation. We don't look at other sustainability efforts or biodiversity issues. And our methodology that we do builds very much on the RF regulation, on the EU taxonomy, and is to a large degree in line with the framework that the speaker from the European Commission just highlighted for the green recovery. But we don't mirror that to 100%. There are some things where we have a little bit leeway, and in some cases we're slightly stricter. But there is not very much of a difference. I would like to thank at this point to all the contributors. We're doing this effort together with another research partner, E3G, on a European scale, but we strongly depend on national support, and CSD, and especially Radostina has been a great support in helping us analyze national activities in Bulgaria. We classify. What we do is we take the package and we look at each measure, really each individual measure, and we classify it in one of those 6 categories: very positive, positive, negative, very negative. There are some things at the bottom which basically we don't think they have a big climate effect, things like healthcare, social support measures, and there is a big chunk of gray area where we say it probably has a climate likely effect, but the direction is not accessible. I can go more into details of the methodology, but I keep it short and prefer to show you some results. That is a look at all of the countries we've assessed so far. And what you see is very little, very negative, a chunk of negative, a lot of is tax exemptions, a mix of very positive and positive, but you see this large chunk of there is a climate effect, but we can't really say which direction it goes. And I just want to give you a feeling of what that is. For example, these are things, and it's a large chunk, right? It's a quarter of the money goes into, we don't know which direction it moves, okay? These are things where basically we see a combination under one heading, right? And one budget line, we see a combination of positive things and negative things. So that's hard for us to assess where it goes. We see things where, for example, we say, oh, there is actually hydrogen, but it could also be natural gas. Hard to grasp from the level of detail we have. And we see, for example, things where ambition standards are not high enough, or things are like broadly support for industry. So we don't know what that is, right? Or research in general. And I'll have a closer look in Bulgaria and go into a little bit more detail what that means. Just across the board of all countries, as it was said before, there is the target from the European Union to have 37% of the climate spending to have to be green, right? As we calculated, Bulgaria clearly falls short of that target. It is, if you look at the different countries, there is definitely a number of countries which are doing not as good as Bulgaria, and I think that's something to highlight, that yes, right, it's Bulgaria in a way is in a middle ground in a European comparison, which I think is a good start, but it's not enough for the 37%. And as I said, we don't mirror the European permission assessment scheme to 100%, but if that was like 35%, 36%, I would be able to argue, but less than 10% down, it's clear it's not enough. So zooming on Bulgaria, there's some, I start maybe with the positive, right? There is definitely a big chunk of measures which we consider very positive. Energy efficiency, green transportation, good stuff. That's good to see and very encouraging. There is a very large budget of positive measures, which we rate less into the green spending share. And just to give you some examples, I've looked up some of the individual measures, and this links very much to the scenarios that Radostina has presented. There's a lot of energy efficiency in the Bulgarian recovery plan, but only like 20 million of that is what we would consider really very positive. But $1 billion of that is what we classified as positive because the level of ambition was either not high enough or not clear enough for us to see, where we say it's not a deep renovation, to quote Radostina in the scenario assessment. It's rather shallow renovation level, and there is a risk that those energy efficiency measures have to be done again in coming years, and it's just not enough to get the boost we need. There are some negative things, for example, where we see, oh, there could be loopholes for natural gas and things that are classified as hydrogen, but it's not really clear. Is it really restricted to hydrogen, or how long is the interim period for natural gas, and how does that feel? There is, as I said, this big chunk of there is a climate effect, but the direction is not accessible. There is a lot of funding for research, for innovation, for industry, infrastructure, which I think is good stuff, which is, from an economic point of view, probably very much needed, which supports the innovation system in Bulgaria, but there is no link to research for sustainability, right? And things were mentioned also in terms of circular economy, bringing down the energy use of industry, more efficiency in industry. Those things are not there. They could be there, and I think those would be possibilities to tweak the plan. Shining examples from other countries. I find, Martin, you use that wording. I find if you look into many of the countries, we see that many countries have individual measures which are great, and I think it's good to look at those. There has been some on decarbonizing in industry, for example, in France, which I found interesting. There have been renewables in Poland, offshore wind, which I found interesting. The overall concept of just energy transition and planning in Spain is interesting. One thing I want to highlight, and there is interesting cases in Bulgaria, right? I put this on the list, and it's not because I'm showing this to you, because this is a slide I use similar in other presentations to other countries, because there is definitely things where I say, look at Bulgaria, these are things Bulgaria is doing well. There are other things where it's missing. Comparing, for example, to Finland, or what I find interesting in Finland is that, to me, it looks very much like Finland has a very high score of good measures, but it's very integrated. There's a lot of strategy. The measures are linked to the overall targets and the strategy, and it's less of we collect some projects. And I don't, obviously, have not been part of the discussions in the Bulgarian government, but from the outside, it looks a little bit of, it has been a collection of projects, but they're not strategically aligned towards a long-term decarbonization targets. With that, I just want to conclude and saying, I think when we look at the European climate mitigation targets, the 2030 targets and the long-term decarbonization targets, this is really a big effort. And I think the scenarios that CSD has provided help to understand what kind of effort that is, and aligning. I mean, honestly, it's as much as I dislike what COVID and Corona is doing to us in terms of it's so much money that we collectively as a European Union are putting on the table. If we don't spend that money wisely, and really in a strategic long-term thinking, it's such a wasted opportunity. And I think with some tweaks and some ambition raisings, a lot of what is in the Bulgarian plan could be really geared towards reaching those targets. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, everyone. Looking forward to discussions and further inputs from the others.
Thank you so much, Timon, not only for the great in-depth analysis of the national recovery plans across Europe, but also to sticking to the time frame. So that was great. So now I'll pass the floor to Dr. Marcel Macera, who is the head of the Energy Security, Distribution and Markets Unit of the Energy Transport and Climate Directorate at the Joint Research Center at the European Commission. He leads the group supporting European policies on the security of supply of power and gas at JRC, and has also worked on a number of important assessments on the link between energy security, transition, and digital innovation. In that respect, I would like to ask him to speak a bit more about how the JRC views the role of innovation in the development of long-term decarbonization policy roadmaps, and what are some of the unknowns along the way of actually designing long-term decarbonization pathways. Thank you. The floor is yours, Marcel.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I will also take the floor following the previous presentation. I think that there were a couple of things that are very important. One is that the facility is not just recovery, it's resilience. And so the question is, why resilience? And which is the link of resilience with climate, with innovation, with changes in society? The second is, what is planning? So you have made very nice scenarios, but how we link planning with our decision making from the political point of view, from the research point of view. What should we tell policymakers regarding this? And the final point is capabilities that is related to this, that are human skills, but also institutional capabilities. So resilience is a crucial concept. If we talk of resilience, it means that we already know that the road towards the future will not be linear, will not be a smooth road towards the future. We are already expecting bumps, failures, disasters. Just think of the last 30 years and make a count of all the things that happened that we didn't expect and that were having negative effects. COVID as one example, but also you can think of geopolitical, natural, cybersecurity, and all the other things that are happening today. In the next year, we will have much more than this. And this will affect all the planning that we have. For that reason, the planning should consider as a key aspect resilience. Resilience is a set of capabilities that will enable us as citizens, as business, as communities, as neighborhood cities, regions, as European Union and global also, to face these bumps in the road. Because it's about having the capabilities already in place for identifying the problems, for reacting against, and to transform in order to follow the path. So no simple linear path. This is the problem with planning, that planning, setting targets and certain lines is like putting a road that just go step by step, like in stairs towards the future. This is not going to be the case. So for being resilient, we need capabilities, I was saying, but we need one special one, that is this new way of looking into the future. That is also related to innovation and to others, that is foresight. Foresight is not just forecast or projecting into the future. And planning has this sort of negative potential side effect, the one of just projecting the current situation. Foresight is an exploration of the possible futures. We in research and our studies on security of supply, markets, innovation, and all the links, we use foresight each and every day. It's not easy to communicate, it's not easy to apply it, but it's the only way to anticipate and explore the future in a constructed way. Unfortunately, talking about innovation, most of our understanding of innovation is about, as they say for the military, of the past war. we are preparing ourselves for the past war, not for what is going to come in the next 20 years. This is another defect that we have in our understanding of green technologies or clean tech or climate solutions. We are at times closing ourselves to the even more innovative solutions, technological, social, business, etc., but also about institutional solutions that will be required for this climate neutrality that we would like to have. And for this, we need a couple of things. First, reflect on human skills. In the end, somebody will have to implement these plans. Somebody will have to be able to do the foresight. Somebody should be able to prepare the resilience, the capabilities on this. And these are human beings. We have to have in the universities, in the research centers, in the think tanks, people with the capabilities for doing this, and also in government. And so it's about personal things. We need people doing this, from the energy efficiency in buildings to the foresight in geopolitical risks, all the spectrum. Otherwise, you will, even if you have all the investments, you will not reach climate neutrality. You will not, because you will not be able to cope with the future. And with all the risks there. The other is the institutional capabilities and governing this. We have big problems. Some of them are, as we say, synchronic. They occur at the same time. For instance, we cannot have clean technologies without digitalization. Investments in digitalization, I don't know if our friends in Wuppertal, they are considered this as green investment. They are green investment. Without digitalization, there is not going to be a green transition. It's one of many solutions. Another point that I wanted to mention is that science has to play a role from A to Z in this. It's not just in the training and in the universities and the research, in the policy making. We in Europe, if we have one characteristic, is that we value science as one of the hands helping in the policy making. I hope that in the all this transition and the path towards climate neutrality, as is shown in this meeting, will consider science as a key element. Okay, thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. Thank you for focusing on resilience and also cautioning our idealism and optimism by pointing out the possibility for failures and possible unforeseen changes in the planning. Planning that will affect the overall transition policy in a way that we cannot envision, as the COVID-19 situation showed. Last but not least, I would like to give the floor to Angelina Galiteva, who is the founder and board president of the Renewables 100 Policy Institute and the chair of the California Independent System Operator. Ms. Galiteva has played a crucial role in managing the energy transition in the state of California, one of the most ambitious regions in the world in terms of decarbonization policies. I would like to ask Angelina to be brief, I'm sorry for that, but also to share briefly her experience and challenges of accelerating the energy transition process in California and how this could be an example for the whole Biden administration and the implementation of his climate neutrality until 2050. This will be a way to also bridge the transatlantic gap and could be a crossroad for cooperation between the EU and the US. Angelina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I realize we're at time. I'm going to try and be as brief as possible and zoom through the slides. A pleasure to be invited. Thank you so much, Radustina, Martin, Ruslan. This is a great event and I appreciate you organizing it. Thank you to all the panelists and specifically to Minister Pekanov. It's great to see that Bulgaria is focused on how we're going to be transitioning to the next level. And for some strange reason, the slide is stuck. It's not moving. Okay. So just very quickly, I'm the founder of Renewables 100 Policy Institute, which was an organization created in 2007 to accelerate the transition to 100% renewable energy. In 2011, I was also named by the governor of California to be on the board of governors for the California ISO, which is one of the largest grid operators in the world, and certainly one of the leaders of integrating renewable energy on the grid, of which we are extremely proud. The job of the ISO is to balance supply and demand every 4 seconds, operate the markets for wholesale electricity, maintain reserves, and manage resource interconnections, as well as to plan grid expansions. As I have always said with the grid operators, if you have the grid operators committed to transitioning to 100% renewable energy, then you're going to have all of the other policies follow suit. This is exactly what happened in California as well. And as we all know, California kind of does its own thing. It's the 5th largest economy in the world if it were a state by itself. And also it is well known that as California goes, so goes the rest of the nation. We're very, very excited about Biden and the new administration coming in. And we think that the policies on the federal level might actually accelerate ours even more. One thing we found out is that policies, in order to be effective and optimized, need to be holistic and address a major amount of issues. They can focus on the 3 principles: transparency, longevity, certainty, and consistency. That was basically the goal, to ensure that 1, you have investors coming in with foreseeability and visibility into the long term, and 2, to insulate the policies from administrative changes, which in the future can change the policies in a massive way and thus disrupt markets and create uncertainty. Also, in order to decarbonize and get to a zero carbon economy by 2045 or 2050, which is also our goal, we needed to have a comprehensive set of regulatory frameworks. One that addresses a very aggressive renewable energy goal, because if you decarbonize electricity, you can then decarbonize transport and buildings and make the path easier. One that addresses greenhouse gas reductions, one that addresses transportation, and certainly energy efficiency and demand energy response are extremely critical. So our goal basically with Senate Bill 100 is to reach 100% by 2045 of renewable energy on the grid. We're well on the road of achieving that goal, and we believe that this is the lowest cost, highest value proposition for our state to transition. We also have greenhouse gas targets, which by 2050 have a goal of reducing emissions at 80% below 1990 levels. The answer of the back of the book is you're at 100% renewable energy, but you've also decarbonized transportation and you've decarbonized the building sector as well. We have a robust electric vehicle goals with a mandate that no internal combustion engines will be sold in California after 2035. And we're building the infrastructure to make that happen, also leading to a lot of electricity jobs and creating a pathway for the just transition. The just transition is a part of each and every one of these goals. The electrification of the transportation sector for us is key, because our greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector are at 41%. We're quite good at decarbonizing the electricity sector, so we're focusing on transport and industrial fuels at this stage of the game. So as I said, the California ISO, which is the grid operator, operates a system that peaks at about 50,000 megawatts. To reach our goals of 60% renewable energy on the grid, we need 8,500 megawatts of new wind, and more importantly, 75,000 megawatts of new solar, and 25,000 of behind-the-meter solar, so totally 100,000 megawatts of solar, and 55,000 megawatts of storage. And that would be storage of all kinds: short-term, medium-term dispatchability, long-term, and load shifting, if we can make that happen. So we're goal on holistically being able to operate at 33% renewable portfolio standard, way ahead of the target. And I'm very proud to say that on April 24th of this year, we reached 94.5% of pure renewable energy operation on the grid. We have only one nuclear power station left, but that power station was decommissioned for maintenance. So the deep penetration, yes, it was only for a few minutes, but it allowed us to see that 100% renewable energy operation with variable resources is indeed possible, and it's something that can be achieved, and the grid can operate reliably, which also in turn makes it more resilient. Now, Radostina wanted me to focus a little bit on why interconnected markets are important, so I'm going to try and do this very quickly. The ISO, which is the grid operator of the West, as you can see here, it is one of 9 grid operators in the country. And as you can see, the Western interconnect is pretty much the Wild West. It consists of 38 separate balancing authorities. And I think this corresponds a little bit to Europe. How do you get all of these separate entities, that, which in their own way are very balkanized, very different, and very dedicated to their own way of operation, to cooperate and optimize the markets? Very similar to what the price coupling mechanism in Europe tries to do, and how we are trying to get this initiative, which is a voluntary initiative in the European power exchanges, to develop a single price coupling solution to be used to calculate electricity prices across Europe and allocate cross-border capacity on a day-ahead basis. Everybody wants to interconnect. Everybody particularly wants to interconnect to Norway, because Norway has the large hydro supplies, and that allows to balance the variable renewables such as wind and solar. Well, we decided to follow suit from our European partners, because we've always had a good relationship with Germany and the rest of Europe. And we've had a nice competition in terms of all renewable energy developments. You can see them correlate quite nicely. And we've had the cross-Atlantic exchanges going on for years. So the ISO, being capable to operate a larger grid, decided to launch a voluntary market similar to the European one, interconnect to the Pacific Northwest Hydro, and basically allow neighboring balancing authorities to join a voluntary real-time market to provide flexible reserves and integrate renewable energy, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and optimize operations across the board. We launched this on a voluntary, you can come and join basis and leave anytime you want if it doesn't work for you. And it happened in November of 2014. 1.3 billion in gross benefits later, the market has grown to cover 82% of the Greater West. So those 38 separate balancing authorities are happily joining, and everybody has economic benefits and operational benefits. This has also resulted in the shutting down of all coal power plants. The last ones are being shut down now throughout the West. And a lot of states adopting renewable portfolio standards as ambitious as California, which is actually a good thing. We've seen CO2 reductions, and we've seen environmental and economic benefits. The next step, of course, is to move forward to the day-ahead and extended day-ahead services market. And we're working on the governance to make sure that that can happen. And a good question is, why don't you have full regional integration in the West? It's not a technical issue, it's a governance issue. So we're working through the governance to make sure that we can change all that is necessary and have everybody be comfortable to play nice with each other and actually achieve the economic benefits that would result from a day ahead and a full integrated RTO throughout the West. We can reach 100% on a national basis. This was the NREL study that came through, but it requires a backbone national grid or an integration of all the balancing authorities. So hopefully that happens one day. We like the grid, we like grid operators, we want it to happen. There's a lot of cooperation happening on the grid level, which is also international. I just wanted to mention very quickly that there's an organization that was started called the Go15, which is a voluntary initiative, again, by the world's 17 largest power grid operators. Right now, they represent more than 70% of the world's electricity demand and provide electricity to 3.4 billion consumers. They span the globe. They're on 6 continents. They cover Europe, Asia, Africa, and we go to all the conference. Actually, the ISO is now the chair of this organization. And we are leading the charge for the reliable integration of renewables and the fast pathway to decarbonizing the grid. Now, why is this also important with respect to the just transition and creating jobs? What we've seen in the last years, because we basically had in 2008, about 20 megawatts of solar on the grid. At this stage, we have over 20,000 megawatts of solar on the grid. And what we've seen in the time frame is that there are more solar jobs than all of our investor and privately owned utilities combined. So it's a great opportunity for creating new jobs, for creating the Green New Deal, for creating a vision, and for bringing in the unions who are extremely supportive of this just transition, and of course of electrifying everything, because it enables people to retrain and go and acquire new skills and have a job that gives them a pathway, not only for having a paycheck, but for having a career, which is very important. Why have we been successful? In many ways, because California makes more investments into clean tech. Yes.
Sorry.
That's it. It's done. We're almost finished.
Sorry for that.
And of course, the suite of solutions is necessary. It's not a one technology portfolio, but it needs to be a suite of solutions. You need storage, you need energy efficiency and demand response, time of use rates. Your renewable portfolio diversity is important. Greater market integration is key. Regional collaboration in order to be able to move energy around. Electric vehicle and buildings, and most of all, flexible resources. We need flexible resources for ramping up and down. Baseload resources are not as important. And as Marcelo said, what is the future? The future is digitized, decentralized, decarbonized, diversified, and very, very democratized power to the consumer and the prosumer at this stage of the game. And thank you very much for your attention. Happy to take questions and glad to be here.
Thank you so much for these fascinating results you showed about California. What else to expect from California, actually? So I'm not too surprised, but I was excited to see that a 100% decarbonized electricity system is possible. Yeah. By the way, our regional Southeast Europe modeling also shows that the system stays resilient even with 100% zero carbon electricity generation. So this is another good example. So we can move in that direction without fearing security of supply issues too much.
Not at all. Actually, it makes it more secure to have more renewables, actually.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you all. Thank you to all panelists for their very insightful presentations. And I'm sorry that we are running a bit late. I just want to give a couple of minutes to respond to the questions in the chat box. And I'm sorry that we cannot also invite Dmitry Dimitrov from PwC to give a brief intervention on the progress of the territorial just transition plans in Bulgaria. This is also a very important topic, how to decarbonize coal regions in Bulgaria. Bulgaria is very dependent on coal, and PwC is working heavily on consulting the Bulgarian government on this, but we'll have a separate event on that. So in terms of the questions, I would like to turn the floor to those that are directed to Mr. Pekanov, and I would ask Mr. Pekanov to use his responses also as a way to close the event. Felix Kriedemann has asked that given Bulgaria's upcoming energy transition and given its importance, you mentioned a reduction of gas and lignite, but what will be the role of thermal heat energy and the renovation of the buildings in this decarbonization process? And the other question is from Kamelia Slavekova, who is asking about EV charging infrastructure and whether this is a priority for the National Recovery Plan as well.
Thank you, Martin.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you to all the panelists for providing very, very useful and practical information. I listened with a lot of interest and respect towards your inputs and very interesting presentations. Regarding the questions, so regarding the first question on thermal and heating energy, well, we know that the country most probably has a lot of potential in this area. On the other hand, our available exploration and mapping of these energy sources is relatively scarce or relatively old. So we are considering this, we are thinking about this, but we would need new mapping, new exploration to be sure on this. So this is what I can say on this issue. Regarding the renovation of buildings, it would be still a huge part of the plan as it is right now. We are looking into ways into improving it so that we reduce probable uncertainties about how the money is being used, but otherwise it will still be a major part, and in that sense, we'll continue we share and we believe in the flagship initiative in the renovation wave, and I think that it is a very important EU initiative that should be a crucial part of the plan. Thanks to Mr. Wennert, I'm actually well informed about the Green Recovery Tracker. I have seen it also previously. I think it's a very useful set of information. Thank you for the presentation. And also to Ms. Galitova, also very useful information. Of course, we all want to have the sun of California all year long, which would be great. However, we have to be more modest, I think, in some sense. Regarding the EU charging infrastructure, there are some small measures right now, and we are looking into building upon them in the plan. I wouldn't say that this is the highest priority, but this is something important indeed. And overall, I wanted to say thanks again for organizing this event. As I said, very interesting presentations. I will look into them even deeper. I have my academic background that always wants to look at the numbers in more detail and be sure that everything is like I understood it. So I'm hopeful that we can also continue these discussions bilaterally or also with the Center of the Study for Democracy. And I thank you once more. And I wanted to say in conclusion that, as I said already, the recovery plan and the discussions that we have now at the Euro area are extremely important for the long-term sustainability of the European project as a whole as well, because these are the things that the European Union can do for the citizens. So they have to reach them. They have to have a really clear effect on their lives. So I completely agree and share. On one hand, I think you can see I share the enthusiasm, but I also share in acknowledging the importance of all of these processes. We should do them very carefully and very, very precisely, so that we ensure that once we have gone this road, we are doing something important on the EU level. We really do it properly and most efficiently and optimally. So thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pekanov. And it's great to hear that there is evidence-based policy-making approach also in the Bulgarian government. For a very long time, we haven't heard that. Just 1 minute for Angelina and Timon to respond to the questions in the chat box. And we're closing the event. Thank you. Maybe Angelina first. So.
Do you want me to talk about hydrogen? I was just saying, yes, hydrogen is absolutely critical. If you want to decarbonize industry, cement, aviation, shipping, you do need fuels. They're also good for storage. The philosophy that we've adopted in California is build it and they will come. We have a dedicated pipeline for hydrogen going to the ports for shipping. Actually, some of the in-basin power plants that are gas in Los Angeles are being converted to turbines that can run on hydrogen. Before we even have the hydrogen. So kind of the theory of if you build it, they will come. So we're opening to all electrolyzers to come in and supply the hydrogen. We have an excess amount of renewables because we have high penetration. So we traditionally curtail throughout the day. So there's plenty of energy to run hydrogen, even for free. And we welcome the technology, both with fuel cells, both as a storage mechanism and as a fuel that is going to allow us to decarbonize the peaker plants that currently run on gas. So yes, very bullish on hydrogen, particularly green hydrogen made from renewables. And this will also enable us to jumpstart the offshore wind industry. We don't have offshore wind in California because the sea is too deep and we need to have floating turbines. Hopefully we'll have those in the next 5 years. And there will be a big solution towards the hydrogen economy as well. So yeah, thank you for the question. Hydrogen is important as long as it is green hydrogen. Let's not get on the path of gray or blue hydrogen or any of those.
Thank you. And Timon?
There was a question on is there a framework from the European Commission, from the European Union on how to measure whether it complies with the climate criteria. I just put it into, I answered it, so I hope this is visible. Yes, there is. It's a long annex to the regulation. It is a very complex issue in details. I think part of the problem is, even though plans are getting longer and bigger, it is often not very clear what is in the plan to assess it well. It's this could be a session on its own, but I think the important thing of our effort is to make it comparable across Europe, and I think so that you get a first impression. Let's not discuss off whether an individual measure should be rated differently. That could be, we could have some debates on that, but I think the general picture that the tracker gives is probably a good picture that helps to compare countries and get some insights. I hope that helps. If not, just send me an email and I'm happy to discuss further details.
Great, Timon. And with that, on this positive note, I would like to close the event. I think it was an excellent discussion. I would like to thank Mr. Pekanov once again for his great introduction, for putting very clearly the priorities of Europe and Bulgaria on energy transition and in the context of moving Bulgaria closer to the European core. I would like to thank also Ms. Gavalutova for her intervention about the European Commission, and we really hope that the European Commission would be as active in helping member states as possible as they need technical assistance in the final stages of the preparation of the recovery plans. I would like to ask also Marcel Macera for bringing us also to earth and highlighting some of the challenges in the future and the problem of governance, of good governance, and how planning has to be better matched with evidence-based research, with foresight exercises. Timon, thank you once again. Amazing presentation and a great tool that I think the European Commission can definitely take on board as a tool for assessing the recovery plans. I hope it is already happening. And Angelina, thank you for bringing a lot of optimism that the US is moving in the right direction. And I think the EU and the US seem more and more close and more integrated in terms of their approach toward decarbonization. We see that technically everything is possible. So it's about good governance, it's about cooperation, and it's about evidence-based research that will help policies, targeted policies to change the future. So thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists and to all attendees for being patient with us. Sorry for going overboard, but I think it was worthwhile. Thank you, and we'll continue with this decarbonization series very soon.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day.